giving you a lecture now on Scientology, its general background, as it might be known to man. Scientology is, of course, a word which you might say is anglicized. We know what science means. We know that science means truth or wisdom, and we know what ology means. Anybody knows that? That means study. But this does not mean the study of science. This means the study of wisdom, which is about as close as you can get as a straight definition, unless you said wisdomology, or unless you said Scientology is wisdom, and you said that what you were practicing was wisdom. If you said this clearly, that would make a more definite point than saying you were practicing Scientology. But in the essence of the word, it is not talking about science. It's just that the Western world recognizes in the word science something close to a truth. Now, we have the derivation of Scientology being skio, which means knowingness in the fullest sense of the word. And that is the reason why this Scientology was put together. It's the most emphatic word that existed in Western languages, Romance languages, which includes, of course, Latin, one of the roots of English. And it's a very emphatic statement of know. It's knowingness in the fullest sense of the word. It's not otherwise qualified. Now, you notice it isn't science-tology. It might have been better stated as sciotology. But again, that is not close enough to English. So we use a word which is fairly easy to say, which is simply Scientology. You notice here that for a long while we have not used the word Dianetics. Not because Dianetics does not belong to the HAS. It does. 100%. It is a mental therapy and says so in its own title. It says Dianetics. The derivation of that word was dia, nous, with a English engineering twist on it, ethics, which meant no more and no less than through mind. Well, in view of the fact that the Western world thinks of mind as something that mental cases have and other things, we weren't particularly interested in continuing to concentrate upon this thing called mind, although mind is a perfectly useful word. But look at this, through mind. In Scientology, we're not going through mind. We're talking about knowledge. So Dianetics was a mental therapy. There is no doubt about that. And there is no doubt about it that it is a very legitimate ancestor of Scientology. But Scientology is a thing of considerable amplitude, where Dianetics was a very narrow thing indeed. And Dianetics belonged in the world of psychology, and Scientology does not belong in the world of psychology, and is not an advanced psychology, and cannot be defined in the framework of psychology. Psychology is an anglicized word, not necessarily its root words, because today we find that psychology is composited from psyche and ology, and psyche is mind or soul, but leading psychological texts begin very, very carefully by saying that today the word does not refer to the mind or to the soul. To quote one, it has to be studied by its own history, since it no longer refers to the soul, nor even to the mind. So we don't know what psychology refers to. It simply got lost. And so we have to step out and take a word which actually means what it means, which is a study of knowingness, a study of wisdom. We have to take that word because that is what we are doing. Now, philosophically, there is a word called epistemology. But epistemology is quite separate from ontology, another word in the same category as epistemology. Matter is considered to be separate in philosophy. Matter is considered one direction, thought in another direction, and so on. In other words, we are already looking at a cloudy vocabulary when we look at the field of Western philosophy. In fact, nowhere in the West can we find any qualifications for a study which assumes to reach the highest possible level of knowledge which can be attained by man or life. We find nowhere in the Western world a word or a tradition which will embrace Scientology, which makes it difficulty for an auditor when he is trying to communicate to people in the society around him, since they want to know what Scientology is, and then he speaks to them without this tradition. They assume that the word psychology embraces all sorts of eccentricities found in mental behavior. They assume this, so they could not possibly understand how anything could be said to exceed or not be the same as psychology. And they are left in the dilemma of non-recognition. You have not communicated when you have said, we study wisdom. You see, if you just said that, they would say, oh yes, that's very well, I did that in the 3rd grade. Now, in view of the fact that you go out of communication in a society which has no standard of communication on the subject about which you were talking, it is therefore necessary to resort to various shifts in trying to describe what you were doing. You have to find the background which actually leads to an understanding of your subject. Now, there have been many ways that this could be accomplished. But before